The clues to your wellness lie in your history, even if it's many, many years before that something happened to you. And I want to explain how that works. So let's take a look at the way your medical doctor looks at the human body. First of all, it's black and white. If nothing is wrong, then the assumption is that everything is fine, right? If something goes wrong, then your doctor's job is to take a look at your symptoms, run whatever tests are necessary, all for the purpose of coming up with a diagnosis. And then that diagnosis tells the doctor, okay, what kind of treatment options are available for you. Now, a naturopath has a completely different look. And our look is a diagnosis tells me what's going on with your body, but it doesn't tell me what to do to fix it because I have to figure out what caused it to happen. And so there's 4 categories of causes, shall we say, that work together over time to create whatever health problem you have. So here's our model. We put the big gray area in between these 2 things. If you go have a physical and a complete workup and nothing is wrong, that's awesome. It doesn't mean you're up here though. You could literally be anywhere on this scale. So you're born somewhere on this scale, and then you have genetics that make you stronger in certain areas and more vulnerable in other areas. And then you start living your life, right? And from time to time you get hit with one of these 4 types of insults that can happen to your body. So the first one would be times in your life when you've had poor lifestyle habits. So your food, water, sleep, exercise, all those basics. And listen, we've all fallen into those ruts from time to time. Then there's times in your life you've had actual physical stress. So that could be an accident, an injury, a surgery, dental work, delivering a baby. There's all kinds of things that create physical stress to the body. And then we have times that you've been under mental stress, mental and emotional stress. And life being life, we're going to get hit with heavy stress from time to time, and you can feel it pull you down. You know what I mean? It's taking a toll on you. Now, the last category of insults would be toxic insults. And this is what a lot of people overlook, but it's honestly one of the most important things on this chart. And toxicity can be what you would normally think of, like air pollution and water pollution, but it goes way deeper than that. We have chemicals added to our food. We have flame retardants added to our clothing, our furniture, our carpets, and these are some very nasty chemicals. You look at things like medications. So medicine can save your life, but it always has a toxic effect on your body at the same time. Vaccinations, there are some arguments that vaccines could be helpful if made in a way that didn't have so much toxicity. And then we also have illnesses that you've had, right? So maybe you had mono back in the day. Maybe you get fever blisters every once in a while. Maybe you had strep throat as a kid or UTIs or something like that. But infections play a role in that history too. And then I don't want to leave out electromagnetic fields. It's very interesting when you look at the correlation of human health. And when we have introduced more and more electricity and electrical devices into our environment, you see people having more and more chronic problems. So when I first started doing this in 1990, nobody had a cell phone, nobody had a personal computer, no such thing as Wi-Fi, no cell phone towers. It was much more peaceful. But even when you look back earlier, when electricity was introduced into the home, you can see when you look at health trends that there have been impacts from being around electronics. It has an effect on our nervous system. And so anyway, when I do a history, it tells me a story. So a history is so important. You have to start at the very, very beginning. And I would say just your family history tells you a tale. So any chronic illnesses that appear in your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, and your cousins, that will be informative to you. And then we dive into each section of your life. So when your mom was pregnant with you, first of all, did she have to do fertility treatments to get pregnant with you? Those really cause some disruption to the mother's balance of friendly and unfriendly microorganisms. And so you only get the microbiome that your mom was able to pass on to you when you first start into the world. So her condition in that way is very, very important. And then we look at the pregnancy itself. You know, did mom suffer any kind of health issues during pregnancy? Did she have to take antibiotics for anything? In the modern day, it's even recommended that women get vaccinations in pregnancy. You know, flu shots, COVID shots, DPT, I believe, is recommended now. So you have to be careful. Babies in the womb are exposed, and so you really want to minimize whatever you can. So when I'm doing a history, let's say a mom works in a toxic profession. So let's say mom is a hairdresser and she's doing perms and hair colorings and things like that. Well, baby is getting exposed to these things too. We used to think that the placenta was a protective barrier, but it's really not. So when you do a history with someone, they should really zoom in on your mom's health when she was pregnant with you. Then the birth process itself can set you up for success or trouble. If you were born vaginally, that's the best option. If you were born vaginally and mom had to take medications, an epidural or muscle relaxants or any other kinds of drugs to get through the labor and delivery, well, baby gets exposed to some of that too. The less, the better. Now, you have to have, the goal is to have a living child, at the end of this process. So sometimes there's going to be an emergency C-section. That's unavoidable. Sometimes C-sections are not quite as unavoidable as you might think. And I would highly recommend a book, an old school book called Immaculate Deception by Suzanne Arms. If you look that up, it tells the tale of how in the US we evolved to doing so many cesarean sections on women, and it's really because of all the intervention that happens during the labor and delivery process. So if the woman is given a drug like Pitocin to bring on or speed up labor, it can become difficult, it can become very heavy, and then other drugs are needed, and then sometimes the baby's heart rate starts showing signs of distress. Now you're down the road of having to do a cesarean. So the less intervention, the better, but obviously if you need intervention to save mama or baby, you want to do that. The goal is to have two living people in as good a shape as humanly possible at the end of this process. So I go into those things when I do a health history too. Then we get to the next step of breastfed or bottle fed. The longer you're breastfed, the better. Even a few weeks though is better than nothing. So you take a look at that. Now why on all these labor and delivery processes and breastfeeding, bottle feeding, cesarean section? It's because of the microbiome. We are learning more and more how this balance of friendly and unfriendly microorganisms in the body really dictate health for decades to come. So it's extremely important to have that as balanced as possible. Next comes the question on the health history. Did a father, a grandparent, or a parent serve in Vietnam? Now, and really any of the wars post-Vietnam, because there are some very nasty chemicals that were used in wartime. And if a mother or a father was exposed to any of these chemicals, it can do DNA damage, and any offspring, that are conceived after that time can have some vulnerabilities from that. So I asked that question in a history. It's been extremely interesting to me as a practitioner that Agent Orange in particular seems to even visit past the first generation. So I've seen people who were exposed themselves in Vietnam. I've seen their children have issues, and I've even seen their grandchildren have issues. It's crazy what that chemical does. Once we move past that point in a history, now we're taking a look at illnesses, treatments for those illnesses. You know, did the child have chronic ear infections? Were they kind of on an antibiotic merry-go-round, you know? And you have to also look at the toxic impacts that might have been around. I always ask, what city and state did you live in? So when I do a history, I'm breaking it into approximately 10-year increments, so I can get a chronological idea of when people were hit with which things and how well they recovered from that. And so you look at, where did you live? Because there are certain toxins that are prevalent in certain areas. You know, there are areas of Tennessee where there was lots of radiation, nuclear radiation fallout, you know, around a power plant. There are, you know, if you grew up in Florida or even Georgia where I live, I know you've had pesticide exposure because everything is sprayed. You know, we're extremely buggy. Mosquito trucks came and sprayed. You know, when I was a little kid, they sprayed DDT, which has now been banned. You guys, I've done health histories on people who reported to me, when I was a kid and it was the summertime, we would ride our bikes behind the mosquito truck because the mist felt good in the hot weather. I wish y'all could see Nigel's face behind the camera here. It's crazy to think about, but that's what people have in their history, you know, and all of those things play a role. So I look at where you lived to know what kind of toxins you might have been around. I look at any, as you get older, what kind of professions have you had? What kind of hobbies have you had? You know, did you build model cars when you were a little kid and get exposed to the glue? There's all kinds of things that you can be exposed to as time goes on. So all of that is super, super important in a history. Some of the big things I look for, one of them is mononucleosis. So if a person had mono at some point in their history, that is a big red flag to me, because I know that virus can rear its ugly head from time to time. So I always keep an eye out for mono. So one of the other things I look for in a health history is if you've ever suspected that a home you may have lived in or an office building that you may have worked in could have had mold. And of course, we're very suspicious if a home is on a crawl space or a basement. If an office building, you know, if coworkers are always catching colds and things like that, there's something called a sick building syndrome, which can be mold, can also be other types of chemicals in building materials. So I always pay attention to those things in a history. Now, I want to tell you about the accumulation of toxic loads in the body. So you might think to yourself, a lot of these things are so far gone, there's no way that's still impacting me. Well, I always think of a young woman I knew when I very first got into this field. And she was in her early 20s and she had cervical cancer. And so her family was German and had moved here from Germany, and they had a very good friend who was a retired physician in Germany who specialized in cancer treatment, alternative cancer treatment. So they sent their daughter there. He did what sounded like a Gerson protocol to me, and if you're not familiar with Max Gerson and his daughter Charlotte Gerson and the Gerson Clinic, this is a program for cancer treatment where you drink copious amounts of freshly made vegetable juice, and I believe they even juice liver, you know, for the B12. But they also do enemas, like daily enemas. So when she came back from spending 4 months in Germany, she was the most radiantly healthy person I'd ever seen in my life. And I've not seen one since then that matched her level of health. It was like she radiated. It was very, very interesting. And what she reported to me is that she would have 3 enemas every day, and she drank all these juices, right? So her body was really in detox mode. And she said that even 3 months in, she was getting horrible, nasty stuff out with these enemas. And I thought to myself, gosh, how could a 22-year-old who really came from a health conscious family, you know, and was in better shape than most people already anyway, how could they have so much in their body? Well, you guys, we all do. These toxins are in our tissues, and if we're not able to work on getting them out, they cause damage to our DNA, and they can lead to health problems. And cancer is one of the big ones that they can, but autoimmune conditions as well. Anyway, I say that to say that all these things in your history, even though they may have happened a long time ago, they do play a role in where you are today. And as a naturopath, when I see those things in a history, it speaks to me. I kind of know where did your body start breaking down and not being able to handle this. You know, as a baby you had eczema. Now I see later on in elementary school you develop asthma, and then I see the next thing and the autoimmune and. Well, that tells a story to me, and even the early impacts that were on your body played a role there. So my job is to reverse engineer all that and undo it. And it basically comes down to in with the good, out with the bad. And you have to do that enough that you're able to make progress over your day-to-day exposure to toxicity. Once I saw a website that took you through like the day of a normal person, right? A day in the life. And this person woke up, went in and brushed their teeth. And then it's talking about some of the toxins that are in the tap water, that are in the fluoride toothpaste. She's walking barefoot on the carpet that has flame retardants on it. And it just takes you through the whole day, her personal care products that she uses, and the laundry detergent and the fabric softeners and all these things, right? It's just incredible when you look at the numbers of toxins that we get exposed to. So detoxification has to be a normal part of your day-to-day life. Yes, we take supplements to replace vitamins that are deficient in our food supply or deficient in our bodies because we're carrying these toxic loads, but we also have to do things to detoxify ourselves on the regular so that we're able to keep our nose above the waterline and start rising above the toxins that are around us, because we all want to live long, vibrant, healthy, active lives.